to the Plenty of Positivity podcast. I am your host, Courtney Beck, and today we have a very special guest, Lina Taylor. Lina is a two-time Olympian, an entrepreneur, a scientist, and an executive coach. She has a remarkable story to tell and a vast amount of experience professionally. So without further ado, Lina Taylor.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, Lina, I am so excited to jump right in. First, I do want to recognize Jake Von Scher for the introduction to you. And as we get started, we always like to start off with a brief background and introduction of yourself.
Absolutely. Well, you hear an accent, so I want to address that right away. I was born in Bulgaria, and as I ask people around, not too many people have been to Bulgaria, so I wanted to start with acknowledging that. I grew up there while it was still a communist country, and we didn't have a lot of opportunities behind the Iron Curtain, but I had some big dreams nevertheless. One of my dreams was to come to the US and get my education. But when I told my friends about it, they simply laughed in my face and they said, "Keep dreaming, that will never happen." Well, I stopped telling my friends, but I didn't give up on my dream. And later on, I may share with you a story of how I figured out by the age of 17 to come to the US on my own and get my education. I studied biology at the University of Idaho. And when I graduated, I moved to San Diego, which is where I live today, and started working in the biotech industry there. Until one summer day when I was just sitting on the couch on a weekend and watching the Olympics on TV, when beach volleyball came on as an Olympic sport. And I thought to myself, this looks amazing. And this childhood dream that I had, but I had buried for a long time, started to wake up. And I thought to myself, there's no way for me to go back to Bulgaria and play indoor volleyball, which is the sport that I played growing up. But what if I could learn this new sport? And what if I could play in the Olympics? Now, you're starting to get a sense, Courtney, that I didn't lack any ambition. But nevertheless, here I was sitting on the couch watching the Olympics on TV, and I wanted to play at the highest level. So just 4 short years later, together with my little sister, we figured out a way to do that. And that's the beginning of my story.
I absolutely love that. I think it speaks to the power of having a vision and believing in yourself. I think that's critical to life, to career paths that we enter. And to move forward, when I was doing some research for this conversation that we're having now, you have a quote on your website, and it's so powerful. I want to make sure I get it correctly. If life doesn't hand you opportunities, create them. I think that's such a powerful quote. If you do not mind speaking about that and how that resonates to your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mentioned to you how in Bulgaria we didn't have a lot of opportunities. And in fact, I started seeing how opportunities could even be taken away from me. When I was 16 years old, I was cut from my team and I was told, you don't have what it takes to play at the highest level. And that was at a time when I had already invested a substantial amount of time into wanting to become a professional athlete. So that news was devastating to me at the time. And I remember going home the night that it happened, and I couldn't even tell my parents what happened. I just went to my room and I started crying. And I cried and I cried and I cried. And finally, from exhaustion, I fell asleep. But when I woke up the next morning, I remember sitting at the edge of my bed thinking, well, if I'm awake, there has to be a different way. And what happened during the night is I kept asking myself this question, like, why does this hurt so much? Why do I feel like my life is over? Here I was, only 16. It hadn't even begun. And that question helped me to realize that, to me, being on that team represented the gateway to the rest of my life, everything that I wanted. And that simple realization in that very vulnerable moment is what gave me courage to make a decision. So what I decided to do was that I would go back to my team and take my spot in the lineup and face the coach, and very possibly face the humiliation that she would kick me out now in front of everybody. But I was ready to take humiliation before I gave up on my dream. And so I went back And what happened when I went back was that, of course, when I walked into the gym, all of my teammates started whispering, "Why are you here? Why are you humiliating yourself?" But I didn't say a word. I just went to the lineup and took my spot. The coach now went from person to person and stood in front of me. And after a while, she started walking without even saying a word. And I realized in that moment that maybe she was giving me a second chance just because I showed up that day. And that is what transformed my life. That is when invisible doors started to open. I quadrupled my effort in volleyball. I became a starter on the team, proving that I really deserved that spot. But most importantly, proving to myself that if something is really important to me, I will do anything to make it happen. So that's where that saying, that quote comes from.
I love that. And I think the one thing that really stood out to you in that story is how you mentioned showing up. Showing up sometimes, for example, I feel when we're starting, maybe we're jumping into a career path, it's brand new. We may not know everything. We just came out of training, for example. But a lot of the times, the knowledge will come. But what really matters is showing up and paying attention, whatever it is. Like I said, if you're in training, if it's in sports, showing up on time, showing that you're interested and to get better at whatever it is you're doing, if it is in sport, if it is in career. But I think that's such a profound story that I know would launch you into your career in sport, and then the determination, as we'll certainly get to in this particular conversation, but how you would become a founder of multiple companies, nonprofits, but it comes from that determination and that will to never give up when you believe in yourself and you know what you're capable of doing. So if we could take a step back just for a second, you speak about how you would move to America from communist Bulgaria at the time at the age of 17. Could you walk the audience through how you would get to the University of Idaho and compete on their volleyball team?
And that's an interesting story in and of itself, because I shared with you at the beginning how I had that dream to come to the US. But of course, at that time, there was no internet. We didn't have a lot of information. I had never known anyone that had done that before. And my parents were making the equivalent of $100 a month. So I knew they couldn't send me and pay for my education. And as I was trying to figure out how I'm going to do it, I had a pen pal from Cyprus. This was a girl that I met when I was only 11 years old, and I had asked her to be my pen pal so that I could practice my English. There weren't too many people at the time that spoke English in Bulgaria, so I would write these little letters to her, and she would write me back, wait for a couple months. It was snail mail, no messenger at the time, no way to exchange information. But I told her what my dream was. I told her that I wanted to come to the US, and she wrote me back and she said, "Did you know that in America, if you're really good in a sport, the university can pay for your education? You can get an athletic scholarship." That information was not even available to me. So I said, this is it. This is how I'm going to do it. So picture me sitting there in Bulgaria and having a book with the addresses of American universities, and me handwriting to those universities asking to be connected to the volleyball coach and get a volleyball scholarship. So as cute as those letters may have been, when they got to general admissions, they didn't do the work. So I never got the kind of response that would actually create that opportunity for me. And it became extremely discouraging because it also cost a lot of money just to mail those letters. But then one day, that same pen pal from Cyprus, she wrote me back and she said, "Look at what I found in the trash." She had started working at the Volleyball Federation in Cyprus, and leaving work one day, something caught her eye. So out of the trash, she pulled out a crumbled up piece of paper that turned out to be a recruiting letter from the volleyball coach at the University of Idaho, who was doing the same thing that I was doing, trying to recruit players internationally. But all of his letters ended up in the trash because nobody wanted to give up their players. So if it wasn't for me taking that chance, sharing my dream, talking about it with my pen pal. And then it was years later that she had that opportunity, but she had remembered that this is what I wanted to do. So that is what helped me to become the first athlete to come from Bulgaria to the US on an athletic scholarship. And that opened the gates. Now, I helped as many of my friends as I could. We put it in the newspapers. And even to this day, I now have friends that are sending their children on athletic scholarships to transform their lives.
That is an unbelievable story. Just the journey from Bulgaria to America and the transition that probably that was in itself, let alone being able to play volleyball at the University of Idaho. So at this point, you're here at the University of Idaho. You also choose to major in biology, a very difficult major alongside athletics. So if you could walk the audience through the challenges even regarding balance, in college, there's social life, there's academics, there's athletics. If you don't mind speaking to that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really hard. I have no, it wasn't a bouquet of roses in any way, especially not being able to speak the language. I think that was probably the most difficult part because socially I felt so awkward. People would make jokes and it would go over my head, and I sometimes needed a dictionary just to look up what is that word. And of course, by that time the joke has passed, and I just felt trapped in a lot of ways. I felt inadequate. I felt I didn't belong. It was embarrassing every time I would make a mistake. And sometimes I held myself back from speaking because I didn't want to make that mistake. And there were some very miserable nights, I would say. What kept me going was knowing that as I am struggling, but making progress on this difficult road, I will create more opportunities for myself. And one day it may not be as hard as it was in the present moment. And this is something that I learned from sports. In sports, we understand at a very basic level that the way that you improve is through the struggle. The way that your muscles get stronger is by training to almost your breaking point. And so that knowledge is what I was able to translate into how I could deal with those difficult social situations, and hoping that one day I wouldn't feel as awkward, hoping that one day I will get that joke, hoping that maybe even one day I could tell a joke myself.
Sure. Absolutely. And I think your story speaks immensely to the transition coming over from another country in general, but then also just life, college life, right? And I think you are so humble, Lina. I do have to mention to the audience, you would have tremendous success at the University of Iowa. And it was particularly, so on the volleyball team, you were player of the year, you were freshman of the year, you were an academic All-American, and 4-time Big Sky Conference champion. I think that speaks once again to the commitment to a goal and blocking out the noise. Like you said, if people were making fun, if you were honed in on your goal, and that's powerful, because today I feel focus is such a critical ingredient to achieving one's goals. To be able, there's so many distractions, there's so much noise, but to be able to really focus in and hone in on that goal that's speaking, a dream within your heart that's speaking to you. So that is so interesting. So as you would go through college, you then get out, like I said, tremendous success. You graduate with a biology degree. You enter into pharmaceutical sales. What influenced you to go in that particular direction?
I love understanding how things work, and I love the process of something. And that's what led me to choose biology, because it was just basically understanding how all of life works. And one of my favorite subjects was molecular biology. So on a very small scale to understand how the cell works. And I realized, these are some of the most sophisticated entities that are all inside our bodies. And they have the ability to make their own energy, to communicate with the cell around them, to repair themselves if something went wrong. And I thought to myself, these seem infinitely intelligent little things that are all inside. They're microscopic. We can't even see them. How is that possible? But then I wondered, there was a question that I wondered, does the cell, for example, in our kidney or our liver, does it know, is it conscious that is a part of the same organism as the cell in our heart? And then extending that further, well, how is that like us people? How do we are these intelligent beings, and we have the ability to control our circumstances in ways that, just seem miraculous sometimes. But do we understand that we're a part of something bigger, something that is beyond ourselves? And so that is the question that kind of led me on that path of, wanting people to understand that and to create a better working world based on that knowledge. So yes, I guess I was very curious, and then being able to dive into the books, because socially I was so awkward at the time, is what led me to choose biotech.
That is fantastic. And what's so interesting, I do have to share this point, is my background is certainly not science filled at all. And yet I did end up in the pharmaceutical industry. But the science, I give you so much credit, number one, for majoring in biology, but just your curiosity. It's so inspiring, I think, to ask questions, how things evolve, how things develop. That's what's really at the crust, that you could find that passion that you would need to sell whatever product that it is that maybe within the industry of pharmaceutical sales that you were in. But yes, my science background, as you would speak, I was just thinking about it, how I knew it was pretty much in chemistry class in 10th grade. And then I would advance to physics honors. Why I took physics honors, I have no clue. But I commend the people out there that are certainly in that field, because I was not made for it. I really wasn't. But in pharmaceutical sales, I would love for you to speak about this, as you would speak about the social aspect. Sales in general is a lot, no matter what area you're in within sales, relationship building, understanding, in this case, your product that you're selling inside and out. Could you maybe speak to something that you would learn as you were in pharmaceutical sales?
No, a lot of times these conversations went wrong, and not they didn't go the way that I wanted them to go, because I didn't understand a fundamental principle that now I have the benefit of looking back and understanding how things work. Every time I tried to sell a product, things would go sideways. Every time I had a conversation with someone and just was trying to understand what is important to them, things went a lot better. So that's what I learned. I learned that where we place our focus is one of the most important things. And if you're so focused on the outcome of like getting that number, getting that sale, getting that paper signed in sports, getting that point at all costs, a lot of times you don't control, we don't control what someone else would decide. In sales, that's 100% true. So if you go with it, trying to push for a certain outcome, a lot of times you would arouse the sort of like the pushback mechanism that someone, because we don't want to be controlled. We don't want to feel like we're being controlled. We don't want to feel like we're being sold something. I made that mistake hundreds and thousands of times until I finally learned. And there was one, I'll share with you a story that I don't often share out loud, but I think it's important just to highlight that point. So this was not in sales, but it was when I was trying to find a sponsor for to sponsor us to playing beach volleyball, because we didn't have enough money. We had to find sponsors, and I was the manager, the coach, everything all at once. So I was getting on the phone and just like trying to find someone that would help us to have enough money to travel internationally and playing these qualifying events that we needed for the Olympics. And finally, I mean, you know how hard this is. I was with a decision maker on the phone, and that's after hundreds of calls. So I'm with this person and I'm talking to them, and I was so excited because it's like finally you got through, and it sounds like they have an interest. And he asked me a question. He said, "Lina, can you tell me, why do you play beach volleyball?" And I just blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Well, it was because I liked the lifestyle and making a lot of money. That's what I saw on TV, was these players playing in international events, and it was all this glamour and the lifestyle. And that's what I said. And the person, there was like a bit of a silence on the other end. He said, "You know what? I'm getting another call. I'll call you back." And as the phone clicked, I realized I'm never getting a phone call back. And it was one of these moments where my heart just sank, and I was beating myself. And it's like, isn't there a better answer? But what it helped me realize is that I need to think about, why am I really playing beach volleyball? Is it because of what I said, because of this idea of what beach volleyball was to me? That may not be my reality. Just like when we're looking on social media and we see something that looks so alluring, that people have or are experiencing. Well, that may not be your reality. So do you still want to pursue it? To me, the answer was yes, but I had to understand, why was that important to me? So that question, even though I blew that opportunity with that person, it became a turning point for me, because I realized that it gives me the key. To me, playing beach volleyball was about creating a better life, a life on my terms, not a life that would be dictated to me by the circumstances. Now, when I went to play on the court, while other people are playing for the prize check or, being on the podium, I'm playing for my life. It's a whole different story.
I love the why behind everything we do in life. And when you were speaking with regards to the pharmaceutical industry and your experience in it, that was one thing. I've said this actually before, but when I was in it, there was one particular incident about, like, when we talk about selling versus, like I said, really getting to know somebody and understanding their needs and how you could be that solution. But I come fresh out of sales training, and I'm there with my manager, and I'm pumped for this call. And we get in there, and it was probably one of the worst calls I think I've ever experienced. I was a robot, Lina, like literally a robot out of training. And we get back into the car, and he's like, "So how do you think you did?" And I go, "I can't even fake this one." It was too scripted. And he goes, "Be yourself."
Yep.
And that was something I'll never forget. And it kind of coincides with what you were saying. Like, you understood just from that phone call for volleyball, but it was the lesson you had learned was understanding the why. And as you would move forward, because we're going to get into this point, this is such a remarkable story, how you end up in beach volleyball. But when you first begin, could you transition out of, or help us understand how you transition out of the pharmaceutical industry and then into beach volleyball? How did that happen?
Not at once, I'll tell you that. It was, wanting to play at the Olympics, I realized that these players that I was seeing on TV, they were professional players, meaning that that's what they did all day long. And I asked myself the question, well, can I do that? Well, the answer was no. I still needed a job so that I could pay my rent. I still needed to buy groceries. There was just no golden parachute for me coming from anywhere else. And so having a job was a necessity. I was absolutely a necessity. I had to work so that um, I could pay rent and then I could eat. And so I realized that for me, the path will be, I would have to like squeeze it in. I would have to maybe play on the weekends when I had some free time. I would later on start getting up a lot earlier. So if I had daylight before I had to go to work, I would train a little bit, then go to work. You know, for me, I had worked an hour away from where I lived. So it was an 11-hour day that I was spending at work, an hour going to work, 8 hours working there, an hour for lunch, and then an hour going back. If you add that up, that's 11 hours. And then if I had some daylight left at the end of the day, I would go and train a little bit more. And I was at first it seemed very discouraging, and I was like, well, look at them, like they don't have to do that. Well, they have a coach or they have a sponsor, or well, yeah, of course we're going to lose to a team that they can, that's all they do is train all the time. So there were just so many things that were stacked against me. If I didn't understand why playing in the Olympics was important to me at the level that once I shared with you, I realized that I was carving out my life the way that I wanted my life to be. That is what kept pushing me, even though there were so many things stacked on the other side and going against me. So it was just this battle, but what kept me going forward was understanding why this is so important to me. And I can't emphasize it enough, just like you said, that why.
What is so interesting is I notice as you speak the determination to always keep listening to your own voice and not the outside noise. During the training that would lead up to the Sydney, Australia Olympics that you were in, and then also the Athens, Greece Olympics too, you end up competing with your sister, which is an incredible story. Could you walk us through the training, as you mentioned? And I just want to really reiterate that you're not only an athlete at this point, you are a manager, you are yourself and your sister's coach. And you are the strategic, like you said, you were going after sponsorships. Could you explain how, once you were really deep into the training leading up to the Olympics, how that all evolved?
Yeah. Well, I had saved enough money for us to go to our first international event, and that was in Toronto, Canada. And so what my goal there was, we borrowed the camera, and I knew that we needed to study what the other teams are doing so that we could learn. I knew that, I wasn't seeing everything that I had to know while I was just at home in San Diego. So we borrowed a camera, and after we were eliminated from the tournament, I wasn't, it was somewhat expected, it was our first international event, but then we stayed there and we recorded every single match until the end of the tournament. And then when we came home, my plan was to study the tapes, but our camera was stolen from the luggage. And now, not only did I not have the tapes and everything that we had sat there to record, I had to come up with now another almost $1,000 to repay the person that we borrowed the camera from. So it was just, it was one thing after another that you could say, okay, forget it. Like, you gave it a try, just go and work and have a nice life. Again, it's what kept me going back and kept me going forward, was realizing that this is not going to be handed to me. In fact, at every corner, seemingly, I seem to be getting things taken away from me. And so it was hard. At first, my sister, for example, I had to convince her that we should go for this. She's like, this is too hard. This is we were used to playing indoor volleyball. It's a completely different sport than beach volleyball. And so I had to convince her. I said, well, let's go and watch the World Championships. And when we were watching that, she kind of started to get the idea, if you're willing to put in the work, you could have a lot of fun. And I realized that that was another leadership lesson that I share, is that when you want something, you have to start by showing people around you the highest expression of what that could look like, that vision that you mentioned, Courtney, earlier. So starting with the vision, having clarity about that is the way that you start. And then they can figure out how to motivate themselves. You know, like once I was bought into the vision, once she was bought into the vision, then we could pursue and go through some of the difficulties. And it didn't come all at once. And it was, you know, now I look back and I think, oh yeah, you know, we qualified for the Olympics in such a short amount of time. But at the time that you're experiencing something, it seemed like it's lasting ages and years. And so I think a lot of times we don't have enough patience. We don't have enough patience to really stay and pursue and understand that even tiny, tiny little steps will accumulate over time. You know, we want instant gratification. Like I want a house and I want to buy the biggest one. Well, if it doesn't show up this next month, then it's like, okay, well, forget it. I'll never get a house. And it's like cultivating a sense of patience and a sense of curiosity at the same time to discover constantly, to be able to surprise ourselves, is really important.
Patience today, Lina, I just have to emphasize what you just said. I think that is, at least for me, speaking personally, that has to be one of the hardest things, because to your point, whether it's wanting or desiring overnight success, if it's waiting for that text back, like, and it's only been 2 minutes, everything today, everybody wants instantaneously. But what I always remind myself with is you could learn so much in the journey leading up to whatever goal it is. And there's so much personal growth, just as you mentioned, as you were going through this. It seemed like an eternity, but little by little, you were even making an impact on your sister to get her to come with you. And the power of visualization, of watching others. I know the one thing that it really reminded me of when you were talking, I was in gymnastics for a pretty long period of my life. But when I was very young, I will never forget watching the 1996 Olympics. And when I would watch that when I was younger, I remember even too, I think like a year later, my father had, for Christmas, got me a balance beam for like the living room. But you would watch this and it got me so motivated to go for that. I want to be one of those girls someday. Yeah. And then you're practicing it. But I think what you're speaking about, whether it's patience, whether it's the visualization, being able to watch it and to really see yourself being in that position, I think so powerful in life and in sport particularly. So there you are. You, like I said, you made it to the 2000 Olympics. You made it to the 2004 Olympics. And at this point, Lina, you've accomplished so much. You could sit back at this point in life and just enjoy life. But instead, you get back up and you're now entering into helping organizations with networking, with bringing people together, leadership training. Could you speak about your passion after the Olympics and how you navigated that journey?
That was another long journey, Courtney, and it took a long time to figure out, you know, what do I want my next chapter to look like and what do I want it to be? And it came from a lot of introspection and a lot of struggle. Again, it wasn't like it was just clear to me, okay, this is what I want to do and this is who I am. That sense of identity of, I struggled a lot with, well, if I'm not competing anymore, well, who I am. And if I'm now a mom, okay, well, I know that there's more than just wanting to be a mom. You know, there's more that I want to give into the world. So it was a practice of asking myself questions. And that was something that I instinctively stumbled upon, especially in those difficult situations in my life where like I said, when I got cut, I kept asking myself those questions like, why does this hurt so much? Why do I feel like my life is over? Why is this important to me? When we were not succeeding, it's like I would ask the question that would come to me is, just zoom out. So what I realized is that I was coaching myself in my own mind by asking myself these questions. And then I thought, well, it didn't seem like I had some superpowers to begin with, but I was able to develop some capacities by asking myself those questions and by looking at every situation and just struggling, trying to figure out a way, taking action, taking risks. I wasn't even particularly brave, but what gave me courage to take risks was understanding what is important to me. So I understood after a while that this is a process, that I am applying to my own life. Well, how could I apply that to other people? And I started asking myself another question, like, how could I have these journals for my kids. I have 3 kids and I have a journal for myself and a journal for every kid. And as you understand, I'm pretty introspective. So I'm always like writing things down, and I was getting frustrated because I didn't have time to write in every kid's journal, in my journal, in our family journal. And I said to myself, like, how can I learn to tell stories in a better way? And that question is what led me to maybe try Toastmasters a little bit and try to, then I thought to myself, well, what story do I tell? Like, I can't just come up with a story. Then I said, oh, well, I can tell my stories. I can tell, what happened in my life. And believe it or not, like, it seems like this is what I do now on a regular basis. But at that time, I hadn't shared those stories with anybody else. They were just like sitting inside of me. And as I started telling those stories, I started realizing there are universal principles that help not just me, they can help other people too. And as I was sharing the story with companies and with professionals, I realized the story is helping them draw those principles and apply them in their own lives. And then I had an opportunity to give a presentation to a big company, Amazon Web Services. And after the presentation, the leader who had booked me for that experience, he said, do you do executive coaching? And I said, not formally, I don't. Well, I would like you to coach. I have a couple of leaders that are coming up and we think they have a lot of potential. And I said, well, let me get my coaching certification. So once I started getting into studying for the coaching certification, I realized coaching is what I had done with myself through all those difficult times. I coached myself by asking myself questions out of some really tough situations. So this is now what I do for companies, being an executive coach, doing these presentations.
That's incredible. And the 2 main themes that I got from that, I want to kind of go back just a little bit. When you talk about the athlete identity, it's so real. I struggled coming out of gymnastics as much as I wanted to keep pursuing it. Unfortunately, the majority of gymnasts stop at 21, basically college after. But it really is understanding something that's been you've embodied for such a long period of your life, and then all of a sudden one day it is cold turkey, you're done. And to be able to pick yourself back up, move forward, and then discover other skills that you may have that you don't even know at that point, I think is very difficult. And so I'm so happy that you mentioned that, because I think many people actually do struggle with that, especially student athletes, let alone at your level professionally, playing at the Olympic Games professionally. I mean, it's truly incredible, but to have that transition and to make it smooth, sometimes it's not always, but how you utilize that experience. And then now the storytelling I believe storytelling is so powerful because we could learn so much, as you mentioned, just so far in our conversation, how what looks like it was okay, you transition from, one point, one stage of your life to the other, but there's so many challenges, personal challenges, and how through those challenges, the personal growth that you would experience and how meeting people would kind of navigate your path moving forward. And so I want to speak to, after some of these organizations that you worked for, you decided to create Close the Gap Leadership, and you became a CEO of Climate Executive Coaching. If we could just go back to the Close the Gap Leadership, what is your mission? What is your objective by creating that organization?
Yeah, it was really looking back on my experiences and asking myself the question, what were the steps that I took that got me from where I was starting and having some pretty ambitious goals and then accomplishing them despite the odds that were stacked against me, it seemed like at a lot of times. And so the word close is something that I came up as an acronym to the steps that we take. So we start, the C stands for clarity, right? This is where we start. You mentioned it at the very beginning, but it's this clarity of our vision that we start with. The L stands for having laser sharp focus. So how do we eliminate the distractions and focus only on the things that we could control, which is the strategy of how do we get this vision to become a reality. I realized that there always comes a point, at least in my experience, that you're going to, the red carpet didn't just like roll open. It's like, hey, come to the Olympics. We're waiting for you.
Sure.
So that you're going to face some obstacles. So the O stands for how do we overcome these obstacles and turn them into opportunities? And it's really through that introspective process of finding out what really matters most. Building resilience. Resilience is this capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, right? As a gymnast, Courtney, I mean, you probably know that better than anyone, because in volleyball, I always say we have 12 seconds between rallies. But as a gymnast, 12 seconds is an eternity, right? It's like 12 seconds between like a flip. You're flipping up in milliseconds, right?
It's so true, Lina. I just you bring back so many memories. I mean, it's just a flood of memories. But when you talk about 12 seconds and how it could legitimately be an eternity for a gymnast, for example, you are the only person on that balance beam and 4 inches, 4 foot tall. And 12 seconds, when all eyes are on you, it is up to you to produce. And you can't hide. You cannot hide in that moment. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
Well, you're a storyteller, Courtney. And when we talk about identity, I just want to go back to that a little bit. It's not just athletes. We all go through phases of having different identities. And that is something as a lot of times we get stuck by the idea that other people have for us, and they see, okay, this is who you should be. Then, and early on, we listen to our parents, we listen to all our friends, or society was telling us like this is something that you should do. So being able to look inside and to find that voice, sometimes it's very, very hard. And this is where I say that, like journaling or storytelling is really important, because if you can find that space where you don't constrict yourself to conform to other people's ideas about your life, it may be just a private journal. That's what it was for me. It may be a friend that, only in their presence you feel not judged, and kind of you can explore those deeper layers of who you really are. Mm-hmm. But being able to look inside, because at the end of the day, the reason why we're here is to find out who we are. It's to find out what we bring into the world, to find out through all the struggles and difficulties that we have, what are we developing through these capacities that, now we can have the life that we really want. that's where a lot of people, would go through their whole lives and end up in midlife crisis, right? Because at one point you wake up and you realize, like, whose life have I been living all this time?
To your very point, the journaling it's so powerful. I know I journal a lot. And for me, I always find it very beneficial early in the morning. I'm an early morning girl. I don't know about you. Are you an early morning?
Morning. That's my time.
Yes. And so when it's quiet, my husband and I, we only have two dogs. We don't have kids. But I will say in the morning when others are sleeping and it's just so quiet, I feel that's the place where I could truly hear my own thoughts so clearly with sheer clarity that you speak about, and writing and understanding as you think about your thoughts, where your visions then navigating you. What is that next step you want to take? I had just graduated in December from my PhD program. And at that point, once again, just like you were experiencing, you're going through the next stage. What is that next stage? What does that look like? That next chapter is we're opening up the book, we're flipping the page. What does that look like? But I'm so happy that you speak about journaling, because I think there's so much power behind journaling.
Yeah, some of the most tremendous things that we have seen are coming through those introspective moments. And so the question to ask ourselves there is, how can I create and carve out that little time when I can give myself permission to be truly who I am, and to listen and develop the skill to listen to that inner voice? You would be amazed at how we don't listen to ourselves enough. And sometimes we're our own worst critics. Before even other people can judge us, we start to judge ourselves, and we don't give ourselves permission to daydream or to dream or to think about, what could be possible for me. So one of the practices that I really like there is to, it's wonderful when you can find someone else that you can exchange thoughts with, but it doesn't always happen, so how can you start creating that space for yourself? And then how can you create that space for another person? Maybe rather than just jumping in and telling your friend what you think about what they should do, maybe just pause and say, that sounds very interesting. Tell me more about that. And so create that space for another person would automatically give you permission to, the next time you have a thought, to create that space for yourself. And transformation is right around the corner.
The power of listening, and how sometimes others, they may be asking you for advice ultimately, but just to listen to them and maybe what they're going through, where that advice could come in. But I know there's been so many times in my life as I was coming up on the next chapter, and some anxiety would kind of filter through me, like, oh, what's next? I got to know what's next. But at the same time, I just think about, like, my husband. We will sit down sometimes, and just to have somebody listen to you, sometimes he'll come up with something that, hey, if it wasn't for listening, maybe he wouldn't have got to that point to offer that advice. So I think there's so much power, like you said, in helping others, but then also listening to them first. So as we move forward, I am so excited because I know this is your passion. But the climate executive coaching, you have a passion for people and you have a passion for the planet. Can you please explain how you would navigate to this point, and what is your mission with this executive coaching?
Absolutely. So this was another thing born from maybe frustration, but I was sitting during the pandemic with my neighbor, and we were doing a passions exercise. So we would list out all the things that we say are important to us, and then we had to rank them in order of importance. And I had always remembered myself, even as a little girl, putting the environment kind of at the top of my list. I would always go and clean up playgrounds. And as I traveled, my sister I marveled at how beautiful our world is. I mean, we had an opportunity to travel all around the world and see some of the most beautiful places. And I could also see at the same time how people we have trashed some of the most beautiful places on earth. And it hurt my heart, to be honest with you, to see like literally all the trash that was there, but also just how the environment is suffering as a result of our actions as people. And I didn't necessarily say, oh, it's their fault, or collectively as people, we're part of the same environment. And so I would put the environment at the top of my list, and I would always, put family and spirituality, all the things that are important to me. And then the next part of the exercise was to rank now how much of your time are you spending on those things that you say are important to you. And that's where the misalignment was very, very obvious to me. So aside from, recycling and teaching my kids about how to recycle, I didn't feel like I was doing much on something that I said is really important to me, and I put it at the top of my list. So while I said this is the most important thing, I was only spending maybe like 1 or 2% of my time. And so that didn't sit with me quite well, but it took a few months to kind of struggle and think like, well, what should I do? How can I bring myself more in alignment with my values? Because that's what it was. I was sitting in disalignment with my values. I said this is important, but I wasn't doing much about it. And so again, it took a while. It's not all of a sudden. It's not like, oh, a flash of lightning happens and then there you are. I struggled. I said, well, if I go back to school, should I get an environmental degree? Well, that will take another 4 years. And, learning more about the climate crisis, I realized we have to do something now. This is like the most critical time. And it didn't seem like I would be able to influence the outcomes as much as I could by going back to school and kind of, diving into some deeper subject. So I said, okay, well, I can still learn about the climate crisis and the environment and what are the different ways to help it. But what if I do something that I'm already good at? So by that time, I was starting to feel more confident in my executive coaching, in my presentations. I was feeling, people are getting good results out of it. And that's when the idea came to me, like, what if I do what I'm already good at, which is this executive coaching, but for people that are already working on the environment and they have the PhDs and they have, what if I help them accelerate their results? Because this is what I was doing with sports with me. Like I was coaching myself and I was able to get some pretty incredible results in a short amount of time. What if I use those same skills and now help them get to where they want to be faster? That fit with what I wanted to do. That fit like with the kind of impact that I wanted to have. And that's what became climate executive coaching.
Something that really stands out is finding that niche, like you said. How could you accelerate if others have like you said, the PhD, that area is already fulfilled as far as their education, but how you could come in and accelerate and help them, I think so critical, because your life story, Lina, it's incredible, because something I really noticed with you is you don't only have the vision, but you take action. And I think that is so important. And to take that action, don't get me wrong, you have to be courageous. You have to be brave. But to be able to do that and understand we're going to make mistakes. We're going to face those challenges, just like you have said, almost every step of the way you faced one or two or three challenges. But to keep going and to persevere, I think today, alongside focus, resilience, in goal setting, and to keep going every day, even when it's difficult, and how, like you said, you would start finding the translation from sport would then become coaching. And then you would share your passion with climate But then how would you get to that next step? Well, you were good at coaching. And so I love how each step of the way, just like you said, you were coaching yourself, and I could follow your thoughts. But that's so powerful. And I think to find your passion, just the way that you speak about it too, I think that's always so exciting to watch somebody really play out their passion, because it's something that's it takes courage. I think it takes courage to step out. And when people are telling you, no, I think you should go in this direction, this is where your strength is, but really following what your heart's telling you. So thank you for sharing that, Lina. As we move forward, I wanted to speak a little bit about mental health. Mental health, and that could be even at the intersection too with social media as well. You mentioned you have 3 beautiful children. Your husband was extremely successful. That's an understatement in football, winning a Super Bowl championship. So how do you, when it comes to mental health, I'll start with you first, but how do you find maybe that peace at the end of the day? You're always going. So being able to have a positive state in your mental health.
Yeah. Well, Courtney, the accolades don't give you that peace of mind. And it's as much as we have accomplished, both my husband and I, we sometimes struggle with our mental health, and sometimes on a daily basis, and we're the first ones to admit it. And so I think understanding that those ups and downs are part of life is one of the first most critical things, because there is no state of perpetual bliss. Or what we may define as perpetual bliss is that there are ups and downs, right? So there's no just like a highlight reel of your life, which is what you may see on Instagram. So those ups and downs are designed just like the cycles of life, just like we have day and night, just like we have rest cycles and we have rejuvenation cycles, and then we have cycles of much activity, but then we have to take a step back and we have to recharge and regenerate. So that's understanding that there's going to be ups and downs, understanding that you don't want to necessarily avoid the downs at all costs. That's another way of creating peace for yourself. And just being able to say, I'm feeling down right now, and being able to sit with that for a moment and not panicking and trying to get out of it as fast as possible, because there is a gift there for you. If you're able to sit with it, you might be able to understand what is the gift. Like, why is this bothering me? Why is this why do I feel down? Why can I get out of this?
Yeah.
Being able to just ask someone a question, it's like, okay, well, tell me more about that. Like, okay, instead of just trying to cheer someone up, just be there, be present with them, and ask them, it's like, okay, well, tell me more about that. Just don't shy away from that moment, because then you may shy away from really the gift that's there for you, but not getting stuck and be perpetually there, right? So understanding that there's going to be a time when you actually have to set it aside and shift your focus to what is your next step. So I think there's so many things that are outside of our control, Courtney, and that, we all know that. The only thing that is fully 100% within our control is where we place our focus. So that is the only golden key, if you will, that we have in life, is by directing our focus, we can get from place A to place B. If you find yourself going back to a negative cycle, ask yourself, well, what are the things that I'm doing? What am I placing my focus on? Am I going back to scrolling and then, looking at that repetitive thing, and then it's creating that anxiety? You have to be honest with yourself, right? You have to develop that rigorous honesty about what is it that you're doing that may be taking you to that place. Now you have a chance. Only now you have a chance to maybe say, okay, well, what is still within my power? How can I shift my focus to a different place where maybe I don't know what's going to happen, but I know it's not going to be that negative result.
Yes.
Focus is the only little piece that we can control, is where is our focus.
I like that. I like the fact you are in charge. You are in charge of, like you said, if it is social media and it's constantly scrolling, where's your goals? What type of goals have you set for yourself to then redirect? And the time spent maybe on social media is not going to be beneficial to leading you to that end result. And so you're right. I like what you say, though, about really being mindful in that state. If it is a point in your life where things aren't working out, you take one step, it seems like you take 3 steps back. But those are the times, I think, though, that remind us, when you do have the big successes, that those were the times that make you always grounded, right? You appreciate the success because you remember, gosh, I remember that time when I was feeling down, but like you said, you snap out of it. So I love that, though. I think that's so important, to be just very mindful of your state of mind, literally, as you're making transitions in life, as you're going through different stages. I think is critical. As a parent, though, Lina, you and your husband have, like I said, 3 beautiful children. From the success that you've achieved in sport and how you've moved along, like I said, pursuing your passions so successfully, what is maybe a word of advice that you want your children to know, maybe when they grow older, or something that you're instilling in them right now as we speak in their younger ages?
Yeah, well, we talk about that, and we talk about making choices in the moment that really align with who you want to be, how do you want to show up, and not necessarily for the outcome that you want to create. So it's one of the most difficult things, because you want to, like, you feel like you want to be able to pour all of your knowledge into your kids, but they have their own life. And I think one of the biggest favors that we can do them is to understand that we're not there to teach them. As much as we are there to guide them, we're not there to teach them. A lot of times they're actually, it's the reverse. They're there to teach us certain things, but we are there to love them. We are there to appreciate them. We are there to support them. When we as parents, my husband and I, when we focus on that, that's the transformative experience. And that is what gives them the wings to now be able to, like, fly out of the nest on their own. If we're trying to tell them, or, to kind of like, this is what you should do. Well, every person has a need for autonomy. So if you're trying to tell someone what to do, even though it may be the best thing for them in the world, their need for autonomy will kick in, and they may resent you, or they may just want to do it the other way, just because you're telling me, and I want to show you that I can do it in another way. So true. And we do it all the time, right? As parents, yeah. Having mindfulness and having, just kind of checking your own intention. Like, am I trying to tell them to do something because I am trying to avoid a certain situation for myself? Okay. So this is what is happening. It's not necessarily like, being able to stay in a place of I don't know, or being uncomfortable. Yes, we're going to try to control things, but and I think this is what the blessing of having children later in life has afforded me, is that I have a bit more perspective. I can take a step back and maybe have some more patience.
Something that just kind of came to my mind as you were speaking was being self-aware and how you come across. And like you said, if you are forcing something onto them, or are you allowing them to explore? And I think that's what's so exciting about kids is, like I said, my husband and I, we don't have any kids right now, but we have a ton of friends that have kids. And being around kids, the one thing that really stands out is their curiosity about life and always questioning, keeping an open mind, because they don't know any better, right? They're trying to learn the world as we speak, right? So I think that's so important, is to keep that open mind and let them explore what's going to satisfy their hearts and what are their desires in life. So that's an excellent tip there, Lina. Thank you so much for that. And then as we round out, we always like to end with a positive quote. Some quote or a phrase maybe somebody has maybe said to you that really resonates with your life, or that you kind of look back sometimes and you're like, okay, that's going to give me that extra motivation for this next task.
Yeah, that's great. A couple of quotes just jump to mind. One is something that I have thought of myself, because every time we try to find a shortcut, we end up sometimes going the long way. So here's the quote that I'd like to give you. The quickest way to find a shortcut is through self-awareness. So
I love that.
being able to be self-aware, I think, is basically how you find the shortcut, even though, it may take you a while to really get there. The other thing that comes to mind is another one, which is a Turkish proverb, but it says, no matter how far you've gone down the wrong road, turn around.
Love that.
Yep.
I love that, because, I think there's so many times in life when we're too nervous to make that next step. And if we do and we figure out, oh, well, this is why I didn't take it, because it's the wrong step. But I think you could learn so much as you do that. I think there's so many times when I know in my own personal experience, that may not be the right direction, but I always reflect, what did I learn from it? Who did I meet along the way that maybe taught me a lesson? And then, to your very point, hey, that turning left is not my direction. I need to now take a right. So I like that. Just take it upon yourself to navigate the direction that you should be going in. So what? You made a mistake. You went left when you were supposed to go right. But I love that. How does that particular quote resonate with you, Lina?
Many times, I've had experiences that didn't work out the way that I wanted, whether it was, a business that I started that didn't work, or a project that didn't work, or even a relationship that didn't work. And so a lot of times we would get stuck in trying to make this work. And me being so positive and wanting, goal oriented, I would always kind of try at all costs to make this work. But at some point, you have to realize that if this doesn't align with some deeper values that I have to let go. I have to let go, and I have to turn around. So it's been many different experiences throughout life that I've had, and especially when things don't work out the way that I want.
Absolutely. Well, Lina, and that's the thing, like, it happens to us all. I could go back and think about times when, you're right, like, you do something and it just doesn't work out the way that you saw it in your mind. Like, it's supposed to work out this way, but it's totally not. But I think that was the one thing I would always think about, is the lessons that we learn in life. Because I think life is really, it's a test. It's a test how we react to certain situations, how we react to people. We could learn so much as we do take those paths. And then that ultimately, of course, lead us to the right path and the purpose as to why we're here. But Lina, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Plenty of Positivity podcast. Your story is remarkable, and I can't thank you enough for sharing all of your vast professional experience. I know our audience is going to take so much from this episode. So thank you, Lina.
Well, thank you, Courtney. I have to tell you, you're a wonderful storyteller. You have such insightful questions, and I just wish you all the success in the podcast, but also in everything that you do. Thank you for having me.